Please, you're welcome to the podium.
I think the chair did a good job in terms of attempting to pronounce my name. I'm also from that province that you heard about earlier today, where we get excited when we see X's, because you know that a click sound is about to come. Well, I wanted to start by saying a few apologies about my not wearing a tie. But then I decided, no, I'm not going to do it because you're going to think I'm a copycat. But the truth is, I showed up recently at an event with my black suit and black tie, and I spent the rest of the time progressively rearranging my dress code. So I was embarrassed recently. Dignitaries, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are visiting this country, Land Bank is a South African development finance institution with a primary focus on agriculture. Definitely small in the global picture, but is playing a crucial role in the South African agricultural landscape. As Professor Rukuni said, markets can also be guided in a certain direction, and we exist to close a certain gap in the market. What we try to do is, of course, to ensure food security, but as the minister said this morning, whilst ensuring that agriculture does not contribute to further climate change. So one or two things I'm going to put on the table. After the presentations of this morning, of course, I hope there's still new things to think about. And of course, I stand between you and lunch, so I'll move very quickly. This is just a brief outline of my presentation, very briefly. There are only 4 points that I'm going to talk to. First of all, this is general knowledge. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. These are the consequences. I think most of the speakers who spoke this morning already touched on this, and some of you may even be familiar with the map which I have borrowed here. The sharp fall in grain yields, in some parts of the world, failure of fisheries, in some parts of the world, changes in the weather patterns, and of course, the negative impact on crops, on certain crops in the global picture. We know there's going to be impact on yields. There may be shifts in terms of the crop growing areas, and some certain crops may not be able to grow in other areas and may survive in other areas better. We know that this will also also impact the choices in terms of crops by the farmers. We also know that this is going to have an impact on the fish stocks, and that certain fish species may migrate to certain areas, which is going to have an impact on certain industries, especially those that are part of this value chain. We also know that all of this is going to, of course, impact food security, and I'm not going to spend more time on that. And of course, the impact is going to be felt very much economically as well. Some of these figures were already mentioned earlier today. The investment in climate change of 364 billion spent in 2011, and I think the speaker, Dr. Sonia, I forgot the name, actually did a better job of breaking it down to show us exactly where this investment went to in terms of adaptation, and we learned that in her presentation that actually agricultural adaptation got much less. There are also estimates that the developing countries are going to need another 110 or to 275 billion annually to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And there is also an estimate by the International Energy Agency that for developing countries to transition to low carbon energy, approximately $10 trillion in energy investments by 2050 is required. In addition, $1.5 trillion per year will be required by 2030 for adaptation action. These are all fascinating figures. I think they are very big amounts of money. I cannot even imagine what $10 trillion looks like. But if you talk about some of the recent drought events that are still fresh in our minds, there's of course the recent US drought of 2012, and its impact was felt on farm prices in certain crops, which also impacted price in terms of price increases and other inputs in the food supply chain, such as animal feed. And of course, this because the U.S. is a big producer for the rest of the world, so this impacted global food prices as well. Closer to home in South Africa, we have our own sad story about a drought in one of our provinces, primarily, although it touches on other areas as well, where more than half of the maize harvest has been lost. And the initial estimates are about 2 billion in terms of the impact of this on the economy. A lot of farmers have been affected, and this area now has been officially declared a disaster area. And of course, from our perspective as a financier in agriculture, this is something that you feel immediately when a certain area, significant area where you have clients undergoes an extreme weather event that impacts on the sustainability of the farming enterprises. And of course, if you stretch it a little bit further in terms of the impact, then you can expect that if farming enterprises are going to be suffering financial losses, you can expect that there may be possible job losses as well. I got this picture from a colleague of mine who recently visited Botswana. He took it from a newspaper in Botswana, and it's just a picture that is can be said to be gross in borrowing from today's language, but it shows the reality of what's happening in terms of these extreme weather conditions that we're talking about today. If you talk about agriculture in Africa compared to other resources, of course, if you look at the global picture, agriculture holds its own. It's actually a very significant resource in terms of the continent. And that's why we are interested in terms of the developments, and that's why the impact is felt almost immediately when something goes wrong in agriculture. I just thought I would share a few notes also about what's happening in terms of the agricultural environment, which have an impact in terms of the work that we do as financiers in the agricultural industry. And you can see what's happening on the world food prices over time. And of course, if you now talk about what this is having on consumers, you will notice that over a period of time there is a steady rise in terms of world food prices with spikes, which are sometimes influenced by some of these extreme weather conditions. Cost of intermediate services. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the detail here. I just thought this is some of the information that talks directly to what's happening in the agricultural sector in South Africa. But I just wanted to demonstrate to you what's happening in terms of the farmers, that the squeeze is actually getting worse and worse as time progresses. You can see what's happening in terms of the producer prices of agricultural products and farm requisites. They seem to be tracking each other. But the other thing, just staying for 1 second in the South African agricultural sector, one thing that can either be looked at as maybe a silver lining in a dark cloud of the pressure is that we notice that liquidations in the agricultural industry seem to be declining. But we don't know what this is can be attributed to. But suspicions are that perhaps the consolidation that's taking place, with big enterprises swallowing up the smaller ones because they have the financial muscle, and of course because there is the issue, as the last speaker also mentioned, of getting scale, in the agriculture sector. So perhaps this is related to that. But in terms of the financial institutions, this again brings another dimension, because then if you're talking about, an overexpressed amount of consolidation in the market, then it also increases the concentration risk within the clientele. Of course, we have to talk about these things also just to complete the context. If you look at, I'm sorry, the text seems to be extremely small in this slide. If you look at, this is on this OECD slide. If you look at on the far right, we have some of the countries that are providing most of the support to their farmers are countries that are mainly developed countries, and you will find that although you have a few countries which are emerging economies that are providing support to agriculture, but most of them do not. China is just I think it's a special case where they have actually increased their in the past year their support to the agricultural sector to 17% in the past year. In South Africa, we remain at 3%. Again, just to complete the story about South Africa, we underwent a deregulation of financial markets that led to the phasing out of financing concessions in agriculture. We had an agricultural credit board that was supporting farmers, and it was closed down. All the legislation that was supportive of markets in the quest to liberalize agricultural markets, new forms of legislation came up. But the provision of direct support to agriculture was replaced by scaled-down indirect support measures. And this made farming a little bit more fragile. And of course, from the perspective of a financier, then it makes your environment a little bit more difficult, more challenging, because then you have to work with farmers that are not getting sufficient support. So in summary, the agriculture industry is inherently risky, and we all know that, and the climate change just makes the environment even more complex for financial institutions. This is common knowledge that farmers often lack the capacity to respond to these extreme weather conditions. And in most cases, what exacerbates the situation is that the institutions that are then supposed to support in these circumstances are not very responsive to farmers' conditions. And of course, there is the issue of the unbalanced support that is received by other nations compared to others who are competing with them within the same space for the same markets. A few points to ponder, and I have just I think 1 or 2 slides for this, and then I finish. The first thing is, of course, I think we have to think about environmentally conscious financing of agriculture. What do I mean by that? And I made one example there. Is we have to think about incentivizing climate-friendly farming methods. For instance, conservation discounts. That's just an example. We have, as a DFI, we have, for instance, within our our credit processes, we have a process of rewarding, those farmers that contribute to a certain number of specified development impact parameters. And my view is that we can extend this easily to the environmental space and look at how to encourage farmers to start thinking about climate smart agriculture. But the other thing is, which maybe is not covered a lot, is the access to insurance, because in my opinion, this improves the chances of farming enterprises to recover after a calamity or an extreme event. We do have in South Africa some companies that are providing crop insurance, but every time you have an extreme weather condition, it always poses a serious challenge for the sustainability of these businesses. And of course, when you think about development finance institution, perhaps there is a clear role where this can be involved, especially with the backing from government. But just to sum it up, I think what's required is comprehensive support for agriculture, and of course this should include adaptation. The other point which I think we can start thinking about is building of capacity in developing countries to be able to respond appropriately. And I think, again, this has been said by many of the speakers already earlier today. Here's what we are looking at. This is just an example. In the land bank, we are looking at 4 areas where we think we can make an impact in terms of our business. We're looking at internal greening of the bank, which involves just processes of managing our energy use and all energy use and water use, etc., within the business. Greening the bank's income is what I spoke about earlier, to think about some of the incentivizing methods or incentives for farmers to encourage them to consider climate smart agriculture, social responsibility, and of course green research. And those are the outcomes that we are looking at on the other side of the slide. Of course, we have, other institutions which have a direct bearing in terms of the business that we do. If you think about, for instance, the International Finance Corporation, which is involved in initiatives, that encourage environmental sustainability and social acceptability of finance programs. It has made agribusiness a priority because of its potential for a broad development impact and a strong role in poverty reduction. The other institution which I can talk about is, of course, the UNEP FI. I may also mention here that we became members of this institution, or we signed the statement of commitment a few days ago to commit ourselves to conservation-friendly or encouraging conservation-friendly agriculture and financing of agriculture. I like the byline that says changing finance and financing change. And we are partnering with them, and we are hoping to get guidance in terms of how to improve ourselves so that we can play an even better role within the agricultural sector. I'm going to end here. Thank you.
You say youth, they have some